And I know a lot of people who have kind of been forced into an early retirement, but really aren't able to find work. Nobody wants to hire somebody that has these industries or these injuries, or they aren't even capable of performing work that they had done all their lives.
So instead of just exporting jobs, we've been trying to export some of the other costs, the workplace injuries, the environmental damage. But the reality is that had General Motors and some of the manufacturers taken this seriously, wouldn't that have actually been a smart investment for the worker, for the health of the company?
The General Motors and the UAW have made really great strides in health and safety, and they have a proven record of this, and they can brag about it, and they should. And in many regards, we're much safer than non-union plants. And I know that even at Toyota, but a lot of these non-union plants, they just work people until they hurt them, and then they just throw them out the door, and they force them to sign these agreements where they won't sue. And these workers, they can't afford the lawsuits, they can't afford to fight the company, and they're out. But in regards to your environment and what you're exposed to chemically, it's a lot more tricky and a lot more complicated. And I know that there was in Flint, there was a problem with cutting fluids, and some people got overexposed, and there was an immediate impact, and some people got really sick and even died. And I believe there are some lawsuits around that. I don't know how that went, but I know in the plant that I worked in Coopersville, perhaps to that community's credit, said when they built that plant, they did not want them to vent any exhaust to the outside because they didn't want to be exposed to anything. There was a lot of farmland around. So what they had to do was set up a ventilation system. We were in effect like a terrarium. Now the plant was air conditioned, so it wasn't too hot, largely because they needed to keep a very constant temperature to manufacture fuel injectors. But we were reliant on the company to maintain this filtration process because all the air in that plant was recycled. It wasn't just vented to the outside and then fresh air brought in. And we had a lot of complaints over the years about ventilation. And sometimes it was so obnoxious that we couldn't stay like in a clean room where you were isolated in a room where all the doors and windows are closed, and people were getting ill from breathing the air because of the fumes from the chemicals that we were exposed to. We fought with them a lot, and I know that the local union, they had to breathe the air too. They didn't like it, and they fought them, but it was such a struggle. And a lot of it, I feel, had to do when UAW entered their cooperative agreements. Health and safety went from being a grievance that they would fight to a cooperative model, and let's sit down and work this out, because while we do want to be safe, we also don't want to hurt the competition. I feel like the old UAW would have shut down that plant at times, would have stopped production and said, you will clean up this environment or we won't work. That kind of action gets results. But like I say, we had what we felt was a lot of cancer and brain tumors coming out of that plant, and more than should be expected from a small community. And I don't know that we'll ever know. All I can say for sure is when people work in an environment like that, they deserve health care in retirement for whatever may happen. You know, whether they get brain tumors or cancer or they need surgeries, whatever it may be, they should have some protection for the risk that they had to take. And indeed, I knew that I was taking certain health care risks. I took that risk based on the assurance that I would have health care all my life. Now, I took the risk, but I don't have that guarantee.
So if the VEBA cannot survive or thrive and General Motors doesn't succeed as intended, then the liability for that ends up being borne by the taxpayers or by nobody at all.
Well, yeah, this is where I feel like the taxpayer, the consumer, has paid twice. Because when the UAW and General Motors would agree to a contract, General Motors would go back to the public, the consumer, and say, you know, those darn union guys, they cost us so much that we have to raise the price of the car. So the consumer had to pay more because we got health care and retirement or pension or a wage increase. But in fact, what the company did, they took that extra profit from the sale of the car and invested it overseas, gave this executive a bonus, gave the shareholder a higher dividend. They didn't set the money aside for health care. Now, as the UAW and this VEBA, if it's not able to pay, which I don't see how it's going to, then who is going to bear the burden? There's a limit to how much can be shifted to the individual, because the individual can't pay, in which case they go to Medicaid or Medicare, and perhaps that cost will be borne, you know, by the taxpayer. Or also what happens is the people who buy insurance costs go up because the cost of health care goes up, because the cost of the uninsured goes up. So the consumer and the taxpayer is paying, when he pays an increased cost for the product, for the taxes that he has to pay, and for the price of their own health care. If General Motors had, you know, not committed this malfeasance and set aside the money originally, then that money would be available. Or if the corporations had recognized that they could not be competitive without national health care, like all of our major competitors have, and got on board with the unions and with the majority of American people who want single-payer health care, we wouldn't be in this position today.
Well, with the time we have remaining, could you address what the worker could do to try and get more accountability or more representation from their union? Because as you mentioned, some of the funds are not properly audited, and the breakdown of trust between the worker and their representatives has had a real impact on their quality of life.
In these latest negotiations that included the government, the UAW has been effectively decertified. Why I say that is, in the next set of negotiations, in 2011, it has been agreed in this contract that if the union members do not agree to wages and benefits equal to the non-union plants, that the contract will go to an arbitrator, and he will decide based on parity with the non-union plants. The UAW really doesn't have a negotiating position anymore. The rank and file members will be allowed to vote, but if they don't vote right, then it'll go to the arbitrator and they will get the non-union standard. If the union cannot negotiate for better than a non-union standard, it does not have a reason to exist.